Okay. All right. Hello, I am Callandra, and we're going to be talking about needle felting, both flat needle felting and 3D needle felting. And I'm going to show some examples of some things that you can do with this. This is a belt favor, and this is just done on the simple cheap acrylic or whatever it's made out of felt that you can get at about any craft store. And this is something I'm working on that's going to be a needle book. It's going to fold in half and have other sheets of felt in it. This is actually made on a piece of felt that I made using wet felting. And I'm going to share a video in a little bit in the chat that is about wet felting. So if you want to try to make your own wet felt. So the difference between wet felting and needle felting is needle felting, you're using needles. They have little barbs on them. You can't really see that on here. Versus wet felting, you don't use any needles. You use hot water, friction, and some soap to make the felt. There are needle felting machines that you can buy that are like sewing machines, and a lot of people that do needle felt applique onto clothing or on large pieces, they'll use the machines. I've never used them because I don't really have a use for that. But you can get some tools that hold multiple needles so that you can go a little faster depending on what you're doing. This one holds 3. There's some that hold 5, 8, and even 10. Some of them have wooden handles. Some of them are plastic. Just look around. Clover is one brand that you can look for. That usually that's what you can find at Michael's or not Michael's, Joann's or Hobby Lobby. But if you look online, there's a lot of others, other tools, and some of them are handmade that you can get. And pretty much what you need to start off with is a piece of foam. Some people will recommend using thick brushes. I've never liked that because it's not even, it's not an even surface. I do prefer to actually use thicker foam than this because this is not quite as thick as my needle. That's something to think about. The 2.5 inches minimum I would even try. Just have to be careful not to push your needle all the way down. I would recommend more 3 inches or thicker. The green foam is actually pretty good. I just was able to get a good deal on this. What I actually use to help protect on that is one, even with a piece of foam, I put a pillow in my lap or I use this box. This is an Art Bin Super Satchel, and I cut a piece of foam to put in here, and I have room on the side that I can set some wool and some tools. And so this is a good portable workspace on here. And so having that hard plastic on the bottom helps. I still usually use a pillow or something else in my lap though, because I am the person that probably could put the needle all the way through the plastic, possibly. I break metal needle files, so it's not out of the realm of possibilities.
I know.
I haven't done it yet, but there's a first time for everything. We'll see. So I have all kinds of extra pillows around for things like that. And so you need to have your foam. You need to have a needle. I recommend having more than one. If you're doing flat felting, they don't tend to break as much. When you start getting into some really hard areas though, or doing 3D, there is a possibility it may break. Be very cautious with the tips coming off. Also, stabbing yourself. Think of it as being like a fish hook with the barbs and stuff. You really don't want that getting into your fingers. This is what I have for a 3D piece right now that I'm working on. It's a little pumpkin. And there's a lot of different things that you can do and be with. Most of my completed examples are hiding from me. I'll show some pictures of them. So we have, this guy needs some wings, but you can get very creative with what you do. And Alona, will you go ahead and share your couple pictures of what you have that you've done? So you can see some different things that you can do with this. There's a lot of possibilities. Alona made me a wonderful master garber that's felted and then attached to a box. And she made a hood.
Yes, I can do that when I know what I'm doing. It's good times.
Okay,
hang on 1 second.
Okay.
think I just have to.
Because I can start with my screen share if you'd like.
No, I got it right here. There we go. All right. Bum, bum, bum. Share.
I think I have to remove the spotlight for you to share. There we go.
Here we go. Yeah. So this was a box that I made for Callandra. It's an award. She got the Master Garber, so I did that all. It's all needle felted. I was able to use a laser to cut stuff. I was not able to get very. You can't get really, really tight stuff. Like if you see her heraldry, like it's just a blob. But that might be my own skills. I might just suck at it.
So you can get very detailed. It just depends, and I'll show some things with that.
All right, and then I also made this. I'm gonna put it to me. Am I spotlighting myself? It's not like I'm looking nice. I'm totally not. All right. So this is my Master Rose hood. So this is all wool, which you clearly need to have in Florida. It's really important to stay really, really warm in the 95+ degree weather that we constantly have here. That's also raining. I don't know, I made it for no reason. So it has a little needle felted rose on it that I made, and it has embroidery in it, and I think the yellow stuff is embroidery too. And then this is my heraldry, and it's all needle felted, and it was ridiculous, and it's more, I just make ridiculous things. So
honestly, needle felted stuff on the garb is an option, but it's not something that you want to put in the washing machine. Definitely hand wash.
Yes, I've never washed this, and I do not intend to wash this. Unless I want a really short one. Maybe if I made it really big and then I shrink it out.
That could work. So I'm just going to show a couple other things and then we'll get started on things. I just want to show there's a lot of diversity in what you can do with this. And so okay.
Yeah, all my stuff is 2D really. I mean, aside from sewing a hood, but that's just sewing. I've done a lot of 3D stuff.
Okay, I'm trying to get to the right screen that I need. Let me move things. There we go. Let's go to this one. Okay. So this is an example when I talk about a needle felted painting. This is what I mean. This is actually part of a series I did, the first one in watercolor, which is a good thing to do if you're wanting to do something very detailed. If you paint or put something together on the computer to make a mock-up, or even just, you know, coloring things in to figure out where you want to place things and what colors you want to have where. This was done on a background was the felt that you can get from Hobby Lobby. They tend to sell pieces that are a good size for doing this type of thing. And then all the colors that are blended, I blended those together. There was a lot of work in that one. And then this is actually showing something that of doing different layers. And the background one here, this one actually is acrylic felt, the navy blue. And then the lighter blue, the green, and the orange are wool blends. Watch those sometimes. The wool blends can be very difficult to felt through. They are very stiff. Acrylic, actually, you can felt wool to acrylic, and you can, but you can't do acrylic to acrylic. It doesn't work very well. And yes, you can get acrylic fibers, but acrylic to acrylic doesn't stick well. But you can do acrylic to wool and wool to wool. But the wool blends, you can't felt directly together either very easily. But this was done to mimic examples taken from various embroidery and period illumination. But from a distance, it can look like embroidery. And this is something using an older technique that you don't see a lot anymore. But when this was starting to become popular in the mid-2000s, the dragon is actually cut out of acrylic felt. And then that is felted, like I took the needles on top of it and felted it onto the background. and then put wool on top of it into the details, and so that secured it. Nothing is sewn on here other than sewing this light blue or medium blue to the navy blue background. That's the only thing that's sewn on. So there is diversity. You can do that. But as I said, you don't see a lot of the felt appliques being put on and then needle felting on top of it, but that was something that used to be more common. And just, fun 3D things that you can do. And taking the creativity level, this is a night scroll that I made for Dame Mara. And this is paper that I just glued onto the background of the felt.
I was going to say, like, wow, you really know how to get detail right.
I was going to say, you can do the detail. Now, I will tell you the tile decor heraldry is a little crooked.
Yeah.
But that's detail. Yes, you can get detail in there.
I tried 3 different ones for that box for you for the heraldry. So, like, it's fine. You're good.
I understand. And I also have been doing this a lot longer than you have. Well, more consistently.
Yes. I pick it up once a decade.
Okay, so we're going to get started now with actually trying to make something. And I know we have some, trying to probably felt along here. So the wool comes in different forms, and there are different types of wools, and some of them are going to felt differently than others. This is a very coarse wool that Hobby Lobby, I don't know if they still do or not because I haven't had to buy wool in a very long time. More on that one later. Used to sell bags of assorted balls that was like usually 4 or 6, and this is the wool. It's a very coarse. It felts very well, but it gets very hairy. Sometimes you end up having to trim some of it off. Another thing you can get, I don't really know what they call these, but these were given as a gift to me that I've seen in some craft stores. They're come in little rolls, and they have different colors in them, and
they look like jelly rolls for quilting, but with wool.
Yeah, and it's very thin, like rectangular pieces that are together, and you can just tear things off. It's pretty coarse too, and it felts pretty quick.
I do have a message from the chat from Elspeth because she doesn't have a mic. The kit that she bought, I guess, was a 3D kitten because it starts with a ball. Just so you know, like,
okay,
she's gonna play with that. So
most things do start with a ball. We can work with that because you can also just take little bits of the wool and play around with things. So wool roving or comb top are terms that you're going to hear. You can get them. You can buy wool by the ounce or in big braids that tend to be about 4 ounces. Unless you're doing a very large project or plan on doing a lot, you don't necessarily need 4 ounces. Reason why I haven't had to buy wool in a long time of things, unless I need just a little bit of a certain color, is back in about 2007, my husband bought me 4 ounces of wool in about 12 different colors. So I've been good for a while on that, other than sometimes I need a little bit of something like white or something. Now though, I buy Cheviot wool from Paradise Fibers, and because I can get 16 ounces for about $16, so a pound for $1, or sorry, a pound for about $16 to $20, depending on the sales that they're having. And this is the Cheviot. This is what I tend to use in my wet felting because it felts pretty good. And what a lot of people will do, like the kits that you can get, and a lot of the professional artists, is if they're doing a 3D piece, they'll start with what they call a core wool, which could be something like Cheviot or Polworth or Jacobs, something that is kind of coarse but still felts pretty evenly. It's not going to be extremely hairy. They'll use that as the base, and then use finer wools like merino, which is really soft and tends to be very smooth and not very hairy. They'll use that on the outside layers and to build up details. You can use something completely with merino, which is tends to be more friendly for people that have wool allergies. Merino is highly recommended. Most people can handling that, but because it's so soft and fine, it takes a lot more wool, and it's a lot more expensive than using a core wool to build up your areas. But when I'm doing needle felting painting, I do use merino a lot because it's not hairy, and so it gives a smoother effect. When I say hairy, you can see that the fibers are all everywhere on here. So since we have somebody with doing 3D, I'm going to go ahead and start with a 3D. And I am going to use something other than white. Find something, since white can be hard to see. We'll use the pink here. Okay. So you do not want to cut your wool because that messes up the fibers and things. Tear off a piece. I'm just going to start with a little bit. Some people do like to, there's a couple different methods for starting to do a 3D piece. Some people like to just pull everything apart, mix up the fibers, and make kind of like a little cloud. And then just kind of ball that together and start trying to stab it. And you just kind of, you can see I'm rotating it all over to try to start stabbing it in different places. And it's kind of a little cloud, but you would keep going. That's one way. Another way, and I'll show more of that later, is to roll it a little bit. And what I tend to do is I've rolled it up a little bit. I'm going to start stabbing it together a little bit to get all sides. And you don't want to just keep stabbing the same thing because you're going to end up getting a flat piece, which is something you can do. You can stab together wool to make a flat piece. I've done that with some Christmas ornaments, making holly leaves. If you're doing that, I recommend using cookie cutters because you can set the cookie cutter down and stab the wool into that and to get the shape, at least to get the basic shape down. And so I'm just turning this all over. So I left this loose piece on the end for a reason. Because if you're going to want to attach something to something, you need to leave some loose wool on the side. Now, if I wanted to, I could tear this off and make this a solid ball. Except for this wool doesn't tear all that easy. So we're going to loose. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to roll this up. I roll this up, tuck this around, and I'm going to secure that down. And so this is the time-consuming part when you're first starting out with a sculptural piece, is getting your base together. It is a lot of stabbing and rotating and making sure you get everything secured. You can try using a multi-tool, but there's actually more possibility that you're going to break your needles doing that. I felt the resistance on it, and so that's why I stopped. There are different types of needles. I know the craft stores that sell the Clover ones, you can get coarse and fine. They have two different grades. One comes in a green package, one comes in a pink. The green are the finer needles for doing more detail work in thinner areas. They are a thinner needle though, and they do break if you're trying to go all the way through a piece like this. That's not a good idea. They're good for just putting a little bit of fiber into a small area. The coarse ones are going to be what you need for making a body or a ball or something like that. There are also other ones that are different shapes. So these are just triangular. You can get star-shaped needles that are for different purposes. I recommend looking that up. I didn't do a handout because if you search on Pinterest or Google with needle felting and whatever it is you're wanting to make, you're probably going to find a tutorial. There are so many out there that are very specific even to different things. Needle felting dogs and animals is a big thing. There are some very realistic ones out there that sometimes you have to do a double take. There was a photo that went viral that somebody was sharing that was supposed to be a baby animal. It was actually needle felted. So it's amazing what you can do in the detail. And see, I'm just going around and it's still kind of soft. Some people, if for a body, they'll leave it, they'll start with the soft point and then start adding the wool, but some people want it hard. And so it just goes around and just can take a little while in there. Now, something you can also do when you get to, like, say, if you're making balls that you want to use for beads for jewelry, when you get it to the point that you want it to be, you can wet felt it to take down some of the hairiness of it. And that would just take some hot water and a little bit of soap and something with friction, like a piece of netting or bubble wrap or even foil. See that a lot. And just wrap that up, add the hot water and the soap and massage it in a little bit, stick it in a piece of foil or bubble wrap, and then roll it around in your hands, and you can help secure things a little bit. Also, depending on what surface you felted to with a flat piece, you can take a steam iron to the finished piece. Do not do that if it's acrylic that you felted to, but if you have something that is a wool background or linen, then you can use the steam iron on that and help close up some of the holes a little bit. Some people like the look of the holes though to make it look like embroidery a little bit, add some texture to it. So I'm going to bring out a piece I have that was already started. Here it is, a pumpkin. So adding some details, actually this shows so this is a color blend that I put together. Some ways that you can do that is taking two colors, a little bit of two different colors, and just kind of tear them apart a little bit to blend them together. You can buy fancy blending boards, but they're really expensive, like $200 for a blending board. Blending cloth on its own is pretty expensive. You can also get a tool like this, or if you have carders, and you can comb it together a little bit. This tool kind of just makes a mess sometimes though, but it's just a little fine little raking tool. That's how you can blend some colors together. So I'm going to show adding, I still have a segment I can add in here on my pumpkin. So I'm going to take a little bit of my wool, and I'm actually going to fold down the end, and we're going to add that in right here. Do not recommend felting in your hand. Do not do what I'm doing here. I'm just doing it so it's easier to see. So I'm starting by just tapping that in a couple places. And then I'm going to, this is one way of adding things, because I know with the shape of how this one it works, sometimes you can pre-felt the shape you're wanting to add a little bit and then leave some fuzzy spots so that you can attach it to your main piece. And so then I'm going to come back here and put that in over here. And I realize this is not the blend I was using on this one, but it works because pumpkins are multicolored. And so on this, I'm trying to make the segments be a little bit three-dimensional. So I'm not going to just pound it in. I'm going to work on trying to stab it from different angles to form the shape that I want. And so I'm getting it from the side a little bit. Eventually I'm going to have to felt down this part, but I want to work on trying to attach it first. And so I'm just pushing it into what's already down. So now I'm going to work on this area. But you do want to watch things if you're trying to keep things slightly three-dimensional. You have to periodically change where you're stabbing at, because if you keep stabbing at the same area repeatedly, you can stab that all the way in and stab it flat. If you're working on a 2D piece, you can actually push the wool all the way through the fabric. So you just have to be careful to help maintain that. Now, how coarse you want to leave it is up to you and what you're doing. I've seen some pictures of some pumpkins people have been doing that they have left them pretty hairy. Like they would have just attached a section like this and just leave it. I've been doing mine a little bit differently, so I'm just gonna push it down. So then I've still got my raised section there. Now, if you don't like what you're doing, like I realized I used the wrong color, you can pull it out. Sometimes some wools are a little bit harder. I was still at a stage that I could do that. But this shows what I was saying, where you could felt part of your section on its own and then add it. Like on my dragon, that's what I did with the cheeks. So on this guy, his cheeks were little balls that I made first, and just little half balls, and that I left with the fuzzy end, so then the fuzzy end can be attached. And then like the eyebrow details of how they're indented, that's just done by having a little bit of wool and sticking the needle down at an angle into the areas that you're wanting to indent a little bit. Same with the trying to get the shape with the mouth and stuff. A lot of that is done with the needle, that if you just focus on certain areas, you can indent things and give some shaping to it. So when you're doing the kitten head, that's something that you're going to end up seeing a lot of. Is you may have a little bit, tiny bit of wool that they may have you lay on it, but then a lot of it's going to be shaping with the needle to get that shape that you want. Because even with the balls, once you have it attached, still have to stab around the cheeks a little bit. And I caught my fingernail there, to get the indentations that you want. And that's kind of what I did with the pumpkin too, is to help maintain the sections, is stabbing into the segments to try to make that more defined. And then I actually added another color piece in here to help define that. So that'll be one thing to go over, how to add some little bit of detail in there. So let me see if I can find, there we go. Okay, so how to add something like that that's kind of a fine line. So I'm going to, one hand's going to twist one direction, the other's going to twist the other. And you can either do it with just, you can do it with just twisting a little bit one direction, or you're make yourself your own little piece of yarn right here. I'm twisting it and then I pull together the center and it twists together. The reason why I do this to try to do a line is because if you just laid a little bit of wool on there, there's a good chance that you're going to felt it in where you can't see what it is that you were trying to define. So just twisting a little bit, it gives the fibers more something to grab onto. You have something that you can actually secure. And so it's easier to put the line. This is a technique that I use also with the flat felting for doing lines, is twisting things. You could use a thin piece of yarn too, if you wanted to. Some people like to try to keep everything purely wool. So I'm working on just trying to secure this in. But this is where shading and things come into play, is I wanted a little bit of a difference in my segments. So that's why I'm adding the little lines into my segments. Do you have any questions so far? Okay, so I'm going to show.
I do, but it's
What?
So if I wanted to add needle felted patch to like a linen thing, could I just like make a patch, like, you know, put my design on and then make the patch, needle felt it to the patch, and then sew the patch onto the thing? Just assume
I would recommend that. You can actually felt onto linen, but if it's something that's going to be worn, I wouldn't do that. I would recommend making a patch and sewing that on. It'll prolong the life of everything.
I know, and you can't wash it, so maybe it's a pipe dream.
Okay. Well, you can hand wash it gently. Mm-hmm. So I was actually going to show something with needle felting on the fabric here in a moment. But first I'm going to do adding a bigger piece. So this is what I'm working on as a stem right now. So instead of making a ball, I just kind of rolled it into a little log, and I'm just stabbing the parts that I want. Now you got to make sure to get that top part though. That's the tricky part, to not hurt yourself. Sometimes that's easier once it's attached to the piece though. So this guy is still a little flimsy, but that's okay. And I can tell I have too much excess wool here, more than what I want there. So I'm going to actually take a little bit of that, and I'm going to roll it up onto my stem and make it part of the stem now. Since I couldn't tear it off, we're just going to make it part of the stem. But I still have some fuzziness that I'm leaving on here to attach it. Sometimes that's the way it works. Felt is one of those things that sometimes what you plan to do with it is not what it wants to do. So you just kind of have to go with it sometimes, of what it decides it wants to be. Okay. So I have my little fuzzy areas so that I can attach the stem. So I am going to anchor it down in several places before doing a lot of felting. So I'm just doing a little bit. I'm going around the piece. And trying to just secure it a little bit. So now I can focus on really getting that down. Now sometimes you will still need to add some additional wool around it to secure it, depending on what you're trying to attach. Like this side didn't have a whole lot of fuzzy, so I'm going to push this down a little bit. Because also this is part of my shaping. And so I'm using the needle to move things a little bit of where I want it to go. So I can make this part try to be out a little bit triangularly on there. I'm starting to get a little bit of the shape there. But that's the basics on doing the 3D. Now there's some more complex things that once you start trying to make some things, which I recommend starting by just felting some balls and getting the hang of that, and then trying some cylinders or something and trying to attach things together. Like a snowman, that's a good project or something. But you can use wire and pipe cleaners to make limbs that can be moved. I have a piece, let me see if I can find it. I will admit I started this piece in like 2007 or 8, and I really probably should finish it at some point. I'm bad about finishing things. But this guy has pipe cleaners for his legs, just like so they're opposable. And that does take some practice trying to felt around the pipe cleaner because you don't want your needle hitting the wire itself. But that's an option, and there's some good tutorials out for that. He's eventually going to have wings and be where he can hang up and be a hanging flying dragon. But this is one where I had to, even with leaving fuzzy parts, I had to add a little bit of extra wool in to attach the arms because these arms were very hard to attach. And little fingers too. So those fingers are done by pre-felting the fingers a little bit and then attaching it to the handpiece. So there, you can do some very intricate things with that. There are eyes that you can buy that are have little pins on the back that you can stick in. Obviously, that is not something you want to give to a child. Needle felting 3D sculptures are not meant to be toys necessarily. There are some that are marketed as toys, but if you're trying to do that, you need to be very mindful of the age of the person you're giving it to and their abilities of things, because you saw how I was able to just rip out a piece. You can secure things down pretty well, but sometimes it is easy to pull things out. And, you know, some children and animals will make it a goal to see what they can tear apart. So just use that caution. This is an example of, I think this was supposed to be an appendage, but I changed my mind on it. So that was pretty felted together.
Just Elspeth has a question. How firm does it need to end up?
So that depends on, that is actually your choice. So, as I said, some people leave things pretty soft and squishy, and some people want everything to be incredibly firm. It just depends on what you're making. If you're trying to do something that needs to stand up like a horse, then you need to have your legs need to have a firm foundation or have wire or pipe cleaners in it, something that's going to give it a firmer foundation and make sure it's felted pretty good. If you're just making something like, you know, a pumpkin, this is pretty hard things, but you could make it soft and squishy. You know, if you're just going to sit it on something for decoration, then it doesn't have to be as firm. So you can leave it really fuzzy or go in with the finer needles and try to make it less fuzzy if you wanted to. It's mostly just your choice on what you're doing. As I said, the big difference is if it's something that needs to stand up on and be supported, then you really need to have a firm base on there. Same with something, you know, if you are doing something like a pumpkin, you do want to at least make sure you've got a little bit something flat on the bottom that it's going to stay and not just roll away. And fun thing is this one, before I did the orange on it, because I did use the Cheviot wool, is it bounced. Is that you can make the wools that bounce. That's something else that you can do. You can make dryer balls. A lot of people like to use those instead of fabric softener. Do recommend if you're starting with a needle felting base though for making a dryer ball, to definitely wet felt the finish on that, because that will harden up, because a dryer ball you do want to have as firm as possible, because otherwise it'll fall apart in the dryer.
She does have another question. My kit has 3 needles. I'm using the large one right now. When is it best to change to one of the others? I have the same thing. I have a kit that has 3 different sizes. And like, I just use the large because like, I don't know.
Okay, are any of them star needles?
Me? I don't know. Hang on, I'll show you. I will do my thing. I don't know what to do with the other one.
This is where I have to think about this. I meant to look this up again because I know there are different gauges.
I don't know. This is the set, the one that I have. It's nice because it's got a bunch right there. It's like a little thing. But no, they just have small, medium, and large, and I don't even know what I did with the large one. So that's good.
Okay. So if they're just calling it small, medium, large, large is the one that you're wanting to use for your coarse stuff.
Oh, actually, I think I know what the difference is for me. It's the length.
The length? Okay, because some of them, they're actually, so like these are labeled 38, 40. There are different gauges that of metal that they can be made out of. And some of them are thinner than others. You want to use a larger one, and this is one of those things that there's not consistency in how things are labeled. And I said the clover ones are coarse and fine is how they're labeled. And so if you have something that's larger, generally I'm thinking I would have to look it up because I don't use these very often. I bought them for something. I would have to look up the gauges to see which ones are the finer ones. Because I think that the 40 is the 40 I think is the more coarse. I'm thinking it's like with a lot of wires that the larger the number, the coarser, but I could be wrong on that. So I do know that's something though that you can search easily. So I would recommend looking at that. As far as when to change in the project though, it depends on what you're doing. So where I'm starting to get into fine detail work here, that's where I may change to a finer needle, like one of these star ones.
Yeah, mine is definitely the length.
Yeah.
Also says, the card says medium, small, medium, large.
Okay. If they're all the same length, then it's going to be referring to the fineness of the needle itself. And so the thinner needles are for doing more detail work, for getting into smaller areas. And the larger is for doing like the body and such like that. Sometimes it's personal preference. I actually, for a long time, just used the coarse needles. It's all I ever used. And that worked out just fine. And I can do some fine detail with it. But I thought I'd play around with some different needles and see what difference it made. And the fine one, when I used some of the fine ones, they would just snap. And that just made me mad. So I just went back to the coarse ones. But I have a lot of hand strength, like ridiculously on my hand strength of things that I've managed to break that people tell me should not be broken. So I go with personal preference on a lot of things, but experiment and see what happens. I say different brands of needles are different, and there's really not a whole lot of consistency. There was one brand that Hancock Fabric used to sell, and I think Joanne started selling it when they first started selling needles. It was horrible. Those things wouldn't felt anything. So just kind of play around with that. And that's some of the things I've seen with some of the cheap ones where you can buy bulk packs of like 40 needles, that some of those, they don't work.
Yeah, I actually have a needle felting tool that I got at Hobby Lobby that was on the clearance section. And there was a reason that it was in the clearance section, because it doesn't work. Like,
yeah.
It just took some wire and said, this will needle felt. What?
So if you do have somebody younger or child or somebody that doesn't have a good manual dexterity, I like this pen tool particularly. There's different brands you can get. Versus the big ones like Alona has one that's got a bigger handle. And say if you're felting a large area, that's fine. But these are good for people that have trouble holding small things. You can just put one needle in it and use it that way, and it gives some extra protection from the needle. You can buy needles that have plastidip essentially built up on the handle, or where somebody has really built up a handle on the needle. And some of them are color coded, so you can tell which needles are which. The only reason I know sometimes on mine is because I know the Clover ones have pink or green on the end of it, and so that helps. But this is what I usually give to people doing flat needle felting that are the ones that are prone to stabbing themselves all the time. So that helps a little bit on that. I have a little bit more control with the single needle, but sometimes my wrist doesn't let me hold it, so sometimes I do have to use the pen tool. So this I really would want to do a little bit more because it's very wiggly. So if you have a wiggly piece, and I said, if you know that you can set it and nobody's going to disturb it, then that's fine. I don't have cats, I don't have children, so it's not going to be an issue. If you have children around or people that like to pick up things, then you probably want it to be more secure and more firm.
I would like to dispute that your claim that you do not have children. I disagree. I've met your husband.
Okay. Yes, but he knows to ask before he plays with anything, before he touches anything, because
I see that he's aged. He's matured a little bit.
yes. Well, once I made a clay unicorn and he packed it up from Qualls and put it in by putting it in a bag of rocks. It was only there a few seconds, and the poor thing lost its ears and its horn. So since then,
Super surprised.
Okay, so now we're going to go to what I prefer, which is the flat felting. I really like this because I try to paint, but I'm actually not that great. I know I make scrolls, but I'm not good with large areas. My hands shake and it just doesn't work very well. So this is how I paint, is with wool. So there's different things that you can do with this to make your pattern on here. I do tend to just freeform it. I will do that, but I recognize it doesn't work for everybody. These pieces are things you're generally not going to wash. So you can use Sharpie to draw on it. Just, if you're one that's going to be crazy about any of it showing, though, just keep that in mind. You can use the disappearing fabric pens. You can use, depending on the felt that you're trying to draw on, you can use the fabric pencils if you're using a smooth felt like this acrylic stuff. If you're using one of those thick pieces of wool, the fabric pencils are not going to work. Marker, you're not going to really want to do a solid line either. You would want to do some dots in places, will work a little bit better. You can also do a running stitch to stitch down part of it. You can try doing prick and pounce, which is where you have your pattern that you put on top, you prick holes and then use a chalk thing over it to go through the dots. Now on the big hairy wools, that will disappear really quickly. Some other things is you can use stencils. I recommend the plastic scrapbooking stencils, or some of the ones that people are 3D printing now that are a little bit sturdier than paper. If you use a paper one, there's a good chance you are going to destroy it. But if you're just doing it for one project, that's fine. Cookie cutters are also good for laying down to get your shape, because with the stencils and the cookie cutters, you could just draw your shape on there, or you can leave it there and hold it in place and just felt around the edges to get your shape and then take it off and do the rest of your felting. So I did draw a pattern on here. I like that you can actually see that. So I'm going to use a little bit of the coarse wool to start things out. So you just need a little bit, and that's actually more than I can start. So I'm just going to take a little tiny bit and tease it a little bit, because if you have all the fibers going the same direction, it's a lot harder to felt, especially with a finer wool, because you'll start if you do that, you're going to start to see where there's places that you just can't felt together. And sometimes if you get stuck with that, add something else that's going a different direction, and then you'll be able to get it down. So I'm going to set this in the area that I want it. And I'm going to start by anchoring around the shape that I want it to be. And so I'm just going around the outside of the petal.
Yeah, if you could move it up just a little bit, we're kind of almost, yeah, there you go. Perfect.
Yeah. Okay, so I've got that. So now I'm going to go into the center. So I'm felting all around in different places. Because if you just focus on one area and said you're going to make that go down a lot more than the other parts of it. And then you have to go back and get everything to the same depth, unless you're trying to create a 3D effect. Okay, so you can see that it's coming through on the back a little bit, unless that one's hard to see. I'll show a better example here in a moment. But as you're going through, you do want to periodically pick it up, because then you can, when you go back over the same areas that you've already gone, it'll start to join together on the back. Like this. So if you're not seeing it come through all the way through your fabric, then you do need to go over it more, because that can be tricky. Like this felt is pretty thick. This is about the same thickness as the big pieces that Hobby Lobby sells on there. And so it is possible to think that you're going all the way through and you're just barely getting through half of the felt. You want it to go all the way through, and you want to go over the area so that it starts to felt together on the back. I was trying something earlier because I see a lot of people that do pet portraits and such. They do it on fabric, linen or cotton, and in an embroidery hoop. And I hadn't tried that, so I wanted to see how that worked. If you're doing something that's just going to be framed and nobody's going to ever touch it or anything, then that's fine. But I'm not happy with how this worked on things. I tried this one. I felted from the front. This one I did from the back, because I wanted to see a difference. I did learn that if you're doing the hoop, you do want to felt it from the back so that you're flat against your piece of foam. Trying to do it the other way was not working very well. But it didn't. This is trying to do it with the regular front facing for the hoop. And I couldn't get the wool to go back and felt against itself. So it's just pushed through. It's just like a punch needle, and there's nothing really securing it too well.
Could you then later go back through, once you put that on, and then felt it to itself by turning it at like making it horizontal and then stabbing it that way?
I would recommend, so for that way, like the only way that I see that the fibers are going to try to secure is if you took an iron to it. Mm-hmm. Which you would not want to do directly. You would want to use a press cloth. Mm-hmm. But if you put a press cloth and then iron the back of it, it would get it to felt.
What if you added a little bit of hot water and a little bit of soap?
Yes. Well, that's what I'm saying. The steam iron.
Yeah, we'll do that. Okay.
The steam iron would take care of that. This one is the one that I felted from behind. And so the fibers are starting to try to secure to each other. So that worked a little bit better by placing the embroidery hoop like this and then felting from, so essentially making this would be my front of my piece. So it works. It's an idea. I have felted to fleece before, That'd be fun for a hat or a bag or something. And we're all in places that we don't really necessarily need a fleece hat in the winter for the most part. But first,
Yeah.
when I started making, it was purple and I was felting stars onto it. I lived in Illinois, so that makes a big difference for the winter.
Look, we got that one day every year where it's like 60 and we're like, oh my God, we're going to die.
It gets a little bit colder in Texas, but right now we're still in the 90s right now. So, okay, so I'm going around this area and I've made my petal. And I realize you can't see that a whole lot, but it is starting to join together on the background. It's pretty secure in there. So how do you do some detail? Once again, your needle can help you control things. So I've got some fibers that are a little bit off for the shape here. So I'm going to take my needle and push that in and just use that as the guide to shape things a little bit. And sometimes you have to go at a little bit of an angle. That's also how you can make things stand out and be a little bit three-dimensional, is going at an angle, because that will make it puff up. If you just felt from the top, you're going to get everything really flat, which is fine for certain things. Now, so I have some of this extra area in here, because as I started to go, it wasn't enough to fill in my area. So I'm just going to take a little bit more and just place it where you want it to be. And so I'm using the needle to push the fiber where I want it to go. Just kind of go all over everything. One time I brought out a bunch of pre-made belt favors where I just sewed them together and actually had a whole bunch of the stick docs to sit down and make belt favors. And they liked it because they got to stab something repeatedly and it was okay. And that's actually what I often do for a workshop is I bring belt favors because that's a good starting piece. Because most people don't wash their belt favors. Now they can wear out. This one's pretty old, I would say, because I haven't lived in Phoenix Tiers in over a decade.
20 years almost?
No, not that long.
15 years, whatever, somewhere between 15 and 20 years.
Phoenix Tiers, I technically would have left 2006 or 7 because I was Cursor Prairie for a little while in there, so I don't know. So a long time, really. I don't think I made this that long ago. I think I made this like 10 years ago, maybe. But, you know, it works, though, for something. And see, that's really, you can see it on the background there. Or my heraldry, my simple heraldry. I have a complex heraldry and I have a simple heraldry.
What? You had a simple heraldry? What?
Yes, I do.
What?
This is my badge. This is my badge. So, like, if my retainers wanted to wear something in my heraldry, this is what they would use.
Your husband is fired. I'm not doing that again. your master garber. He's like, yeah, here's your heraldry. What?
Yeah. Well. Yeah. Okay. So, when I'm talking about detail, that's where sometimes you're working with really tiny things. And as I said before, a part of that, sometimes what you need to do when you're looking at a tiny area is to twist it a little bit. That twisting is going to give you some diversity in your surface a little bit, so you're not just trying to put a line. Because if you just try to put a straight, untwisted line down, it is a pain. Sometimes you'll end up finding that you'll push the whole thing all the way through. So I'm just trying to go and I got my ends kind of secured and trying to get places, but it's just, it's not felting as well. It's having some difficulties. It's hard to see that. Uh, so it's not usually the best method. Twisting it a little bit gives you better surface area for securing things and for trying to form a shape. Because that's what I'm going to do here is I'm using my needle. So I've got some extra fuzzy stuff, so I'm going to turn that back on itself. And I'm just guiding it around to form the shape that I want it to. And this is how you try to do detail area, it's just pushing that needle there a little bit. Sometimes you have to move it around a little bit. But that's how I did a curve. Just curved line. So I twisted that a little bit to make that little curve. And that's showing up a little bit better than trying to just do a straight long piece. Now, the fun thing with this is you can add layers on top of each other. You do want to be mindful of that. If you start getting to having like 6 colors on top of each other, it can be really hard to felt through. You can do 3-dimensional effects though on the flat piece. It's hard to see here, but the arms are actually raised a little bit on there. And I did that by doing the angle technique of going in at an angle. But on the sea serpent that I showed, I really went into some detail on shading with that. And that's just taking the colors and blending things together and adding it in different areas. Pretty much just like I said watercolor, it was gouache that I used, or gouache on it, and which you can add colors on top of it. And so I used that as my base and just kind of followed that around. Eventually I'll make one in leather too. But you can add your little details. Sometimes if you can't twist things, like trying to ball things up a little bit, make a little tiny ball helps, which is what I'm doing here. I just made a little ball, and it's kind of all over the place right now. So I'm using that needle to go down because I'm going to make a little spot on my dragon. You see how that started as being a really large space, and I need to pull that up. Because if you don't pull it up, you could end up really securing your wool to what you're felting on, and it can take a while to try to pull it up, and it's not going to secure right on the back. Sometimes you may end up with some long fibers that you just can't deal with. You could try pulling it, or you can trim it a little bit. So I've got my little round spot there. Well, I don't really want it round. That looks a little weird. So I'm going to push this in a little bit and try to change the shape. And that is how you do the detail. So I'm not sure I'm happy with that, but I changed it from being completely round. It's hard to see, but now it's actually more of a moon shape because I pushed in a little bit. And that's how I did things like on the Callandra heraldry and all those feathers. Oh, those feathers. I don't recommend doing the complex heraldry that small. I think Alona also recommends not doing it that small.
Yeah, but I also can be blamed because I designed the Callandra heraldry. So, yeah, sorry, bye.
Oh, it's still simpler than some others. I wish I had a picture of it, but the old Golden Plains heraldry, which was much more complex and a whole bunch of different flames and everything.
Oh, give me a minute.
I needle felted a favor of that.
I will find that.
And unfortunately, I do not have the picture of that or the favor because I gave it to the monarch at the time. Okay, so that is the basics of everything. Do I have any specific questions or anything?
No. I mean, hang on. Let me go look at the thing. I'm sorry. I'm looking at
Oh, and I said I was going to share the link to the video. So let me share that.
Oh, here it is. Oh my God.
So that should take you to my wet felting video in case you want to try wet felting and make your own felting, your own felt to felt on.
All right. I'm going to show you the old Golden Plains heraldry. Look at that. What a mess.
Oh, that's the simpler one even. That's not even the right one. That's the one that somebody simplified to put on tunics.
Let me see if I can find another one.
The actual one was like the bird and the flames were multicolored, and yeah.
That's actually on my old website. I didn't even know I had that.
You have everything. Oh, and then so if I don't like things, you can still try to pull things out a little bit. It can be a little bit harder on the flat, and you have to watch things. So I'm trying to pull out my little spot because I felted that in really good. So sometimes I think you may have to cut it a little bit, but I pulled it out.
Oh, I found it. Found it.
And now I'm going to fix that spot.
Okay, it's actually...
Do you want to stop recording now?
Yes, but I want to show you this real quick once I find it again. Oh my God, I lost it.
Okay.
Lost it. Here we go. It will not go. All right, that's awesome. Okay. Hang on, let me do this.
Okay.
It's really ridiculous looking. It's right there. You can't really see it, but it's really...
Yeah, I see it.
Yeah. I'm sorry. You guys still have sucky heraldry. Okay, I'm gonna stop recording.